This morning on the Hill.com website. Well, the National Journal pollster conversation is just beginning in Charlotte as we continue our live coverage of the Democratic National Convention.
Here's some good news and information. We have a terrific group of underwriters supporting us this week, and I'd like to recognize them and thank them. The Alliance to Save Energy, the American Federation of Teachers, the Credit Union National Association, Pfizer, Property Casualty Insurers Association of America, United Technologies Corporation, Volkswagen, and Vote for Energy. It takes a lot to put on these programs, so we're very appreciative of our underwriters. Each morning we'll have a different topic related to the election, and today's program is called The Election in Numbers, and it's a conversation with leading pollsters. You'll hear this morning from Joel Benenson, who's president of Benenson Strategy Group, Celinda Lake, who's president of Lake Research Partners, Margie O'Mara, who's the founder of Momentum Analysis, LLC, and John Anzalone, who's a partner at Anzalone List Research. We have a great online audience as well and a TV audience. So we're being joined online at nationaljournal.com and theatlantic.com and at Fora TV, and we have C-SPAN covering the program this morning as well. So for any online or TV viewers or anyone here who'd like to join the conversation or pose questions, please do so on Twitter using hashtag Daily Briefings. That's hashtag Daily Briefings, all one word. So I'm delighted to turn the program over now to two moderators. We have Ron Fournier, who's editor-in-chief of National Journal, and Bill Plant, who is senior White House correspondent with NBC News. They'll begin our program with an interview with Joel Benenson, who's the founding partner and president of the Benenson Strategy Group, which he co-founded in 2002. He served as a strategic analyst and advisor to heads of state, senior members of Congress, and other national political leaders, business leaders, and charitable and advocacy institutions, and is probably best known as the lead pollster and senior strategist for President Barack Obama during the 2008 election, and he continues in that role today. So again, welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here, and I'll turn things over to Ron and Joel.
Thank you very much. Bill will be joining us here in a second. Can everybody hear me out there, first of all? How about this? There we go. Bill, you want to join us?
Ron suggested that I be here.
Yeah, this way he doesn't have to toggle back and forth between us. How about that?
Good,
and you
good.
get to sit next to him.
Hi,
So, Joel, I
everybody.
appreciate you coming.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm going to start off with, this is a follow-up on a conversation we had last week, the same day last week in Tampa with Ron Kaufman, where we talked a little bit about race and politics and made a little bit of news. And I'm just curious, this is something you and I have talked about a lot over the years and have agreed to disagree. Do you think that the president's race is a factor at all in this election?
Yeah, we did talk about this a lot. We talked a lot about it in 2008. And I think that, President Obama, when he was running in 2008, said, I won't win this election because I'm African American, and I won't lose this election because I'm African American. I believe that was true then, and I believe it's true today. I think that the American people are a diverse population. There's a lot going on in this country. There's a lot going on in this world that they're concerned about right now. And this election is about, big things in their lives. He's been the president for 4 years. He's done great things as president. I think we're going to win this election based on the merits, based on who he is, based on what he is doing for average working Americans, working and middle-class people who are trying to reclaim a sense of security. And I think that's what they're going to vote on. They're going to vote on the quality of their lives. And which one of these two guys is going to make my life better over the next 4 years? Who's going to be fighting for me every day? Because the circumstances out there have been pretty tough for these folks for about a decade.
Are you saying that African-American voters would not vote for him based on race, but would vote for the Democrat, period? That he has
I'm
no
not
advantage
saying that.
here?
Look, there are party line voters in each party, Bill. I think that people who consider themselves strong Democrats vote for Democrats and don't split their tickets. People who are strong Republicans vote for strong Republicans and don't split their tickets. In fact, despite the fact that people identify a growing number of independent voters or self-identifying independent voters, one of the dynamics that you really have is people who are independents who lean Democrats, independents who lean Republicans, and a pretty thin slice who are what I would call true independent voters. I think African Americans, they are obviously been a core Democratic voting bloc, but not every Democrat gets the same percentage of the African American vote.
Republican pollsters and some Democratic pollsters and some folks inside the Romney campaign said last week that they believe that the welfare reform ad that is inaccurate that the Romney campaign has put up was intended to move white voters who had voted for Obama or who might vote for Obama and move them into the Romney campaign, and they believe it has. They believe that that welfare ad has been effective as a race card. You disagree?
Well, it's hard to believe anything that people say when they believe an ad that everybody has said is absolutely false. They also believe said they were going to get a big bounce out of their convention, which they didn't have. I mean, they've repeatedly gone to the press with various points of bluster about what's happening in their campaign, and the fundamental fact is still the same, that what we have is an election where people are looking at President Obama, who they believe is fighting for them every day, who believes in an economy that's built to last, that'll restore security for the middle class, versus a candidate who believes in the same top-down economic theory that, frankly, not only crashed our economy, but that the middle class recognizes has been punishing them for a decade.
So on the question, is the welfare ad moving white voters away from Obama or not?
No.
So is the Romney campaign playing the race card by putting that ad on TV?
You'd have to ask the Romney campaign if they're doing that. If they say they're doing that, then I guess they're doing that. But I have no idea if they're playing.
And then lastly on this, if it's not moving voters, why did you guys have such a quick and powerful ad in response with Bill Clinton?
We've had a quick and powerful response to the, multi-million-dollar negative attack that they've been waging along with the super PACs for months. People looked at us when we were responding back in May. We started in June responding to attack ads. We haven't, this isn't something new. We're not going to let their attacks go unanswered. And, there's been a lot of talk about negativity in the campaign all around. This has been a 14-month constant drumbeat of an attack from the Republican Party on President Obama. If you go back and watch their debates through the highly covered Republican primary season, every person on that stage spent their time campaigning by attacking this president. Their whole strategy from day one has to run a massively negative campaign. So we're not surprised when they go on the air with negative ads. We're not surprised when they go on the air with negative ads that aren't true. They've actually come out and said, we don't really care about the facts. So it's hard to give them any shred of credibility when that's what they're saying. We're just going to do what we do as a campaign, respond when we need to, and drive our message going forward.
Well, although it doesn't have a lot to do with polling, your campaign has also indulged in some negative advertising, and some of it that people have charged stretched the truth just a bit, as in, for example, Romney's position on abortion.
Look, Mitt Romney has said very clearly to America that he wants to overturn Roe v. Wade. That Roe v. Wade, which is the law of the land, would be overturned. That's the law that from the Supreme Court and the Constitution that they all claim to revere gives women the right to choice and the right to make decisions about their own bodies and their own health care. He said that. I didn't. That ad is accurate. It
well, not in the sense that he opposes abortion in terms of saving the life of the mother.
If you overturn Roe v. Wade, you overturn Roe v. Wade. And that's the law of the land. If you want to overturn the law of the land, that's what you're overturning. So, you can dance around that, but, if you believe in something different, then you ought to say very clearly what you believe in and what law you would put in place. And he hasn't done that.
Do you really think it doesn't make any difference whether advertising is true or false, as Newhouse suggested? Don't let the facts get in the way.
Neil's a friend of mine. I mean, look, there are a couple of things about advertising, and I think when we look back on this election, I've said this a few weeks ago, I think we're going to look back on something that we haven't experienced before, which is an unprecedented amount of money being spent in total to try to persuade a very small slice of the electorate. I think the dollar per vote that's really in play is quite disproportionate. And I think we don't know a lot about how voters are receiving this, how they're responding to this, how they are absorbing it. I think there's a lot of tuning out going on. I think I give voters a lot of credit always. I never underestimate the electorate, Bill. And I think people are pretty good at sifting through ads. I think they react more to negative ads, react more adversely to negative ads than they have previously. They want more facts. They want more authenticity. Their BS meters go up pretty high with some of the things they see pretty quickly. Maybe that's why so many people are spending so much money out there. But whether or not all of it's going to cut through remains to be seen.
So a lot of talk about a couple of sets of numbers. One, that Governor Romney is ahead of President Clinton on ability to fix the economy.
I think you mean President Obama.
What did I
I know
say?
you're
Did I
looking
say
forward
President
to Bill
Clinton?
Clinton's speech, but it's President Obama.
So living in the past. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow.
Talk about taking us back to the past.
Could have been worse. And President Obama leads Governor Romney on issues like cares about me, will fight for me. Is that second set of arguments, is that an economic argument that we're missing? When people say he fights like me, is that at all something that can be seen as somebody who can help fix the economy?
Yeah, it definitely is. Look, I think when you ask people and you ask questions and attribute ratings and you use the word like understands the economy, I think the word economy immediately connotes some kind of academic or formal understanding of economic principles. People would say economists understand the economy. That's what they do for a living. There is an element of the, of economics in that question. There's no doubt about that. That's certainly clear. And I think, Governor Romney, because he's a businessman, gets some credit for it. But it's not a total pass because it's a double-edged sword for him. The attributes you're talking about, those characteristics, understands the struggles of people like me, will fight for the middle class or, average working Americans. They're very much rooted in the economics of the day. They're very much rooted in the economic lives of the day. People call them empathy attributes too often, or character attributes. They're putting them in the wrong box. If you're an American right now who's part of the middle class, who's part of the working class, what you want to know is who's going to be the person who's going to be fighting for me day in and day out over the next 4 years. Who is going to be the person who's going to be standing up for me when tough times come or corporations want to ship jobs overseas? Who's going to stand up to get rid of those tax breaks to ship jobs overseas and keep my job here? And who's going to let them go? Those kinds of decisions are part of why somebody thinks you're fighting for them, why they think you're going to fight for them every day. It has very much to do, a great deal to do with their economic lives. And I think they get put in boxes too neatly. Obama's strong on character issues and Romney's strong on the economy. I don't think that's true. I think Obama is actually much stronger on the economy. And when you ask that in a head-to-head question, like many polls do, we have almost a double-digit lead over who people believe will fight for the middle class in America today. And if there's a more central question to how we're going to create a strong economy with security for working people and an economy that's going to be durable and built to last, I don't know what that is.
I think there is. I think the question is, what are you going to do about it? And neither candidate right now has really laid out an agenda. President Obama has not laid out a second-term agenda for concretely, and your word, authentically, how he's going to turn the economy around. What is that agenda? Or are we going to hear it on Thursday?
Well, look, first of all, to say he hasn't laid out an agenda of what he would do for the second term is the way you phrased the question. Let's not forget that a year ago, almost to the day, the president laid out an extensive plan that could create 1 million jobs in America today. It could have created 1 million jobs immediately a year ago when he introduced his jobs plan that had 7 points to it. We passed the payroll tax, we passed the Jobs for Vets programs, and through the rest of the year, up to and through today, the Republican Congress has decided to sit on their hands, won't even put them up for a vote. They voted to repeal Obamacare 22 times, but they won't put jobs programs up for a vote. So a year ago, we had things that still have a lot of validity in this economy. We still need to do and can put construction workers and people working on things that we need for our economy going forward. Our roads, our bridges, new schools. Nothing's more vital to our economy going forward than being able to educate our kids. You and I heard business leaders talking about this last night. Microsoft executives saying that they have 6,000 jobs they can fill, but we don't have the kids educated to fill those jobs in America right now. That's incredibly vital. We could rebuild our schools and modernize them so kids get the training they need for some of those jobs. President Obama will be speaking on Thursday night. He has been going around the country talking about many of the things he wants to do. He'll be laying out in more detail that plan as we head towards Thursday night and deliver that to the country as we go forward. The plan is very clear. He's laid out where we need to focus our efforts, what we need to do, and he has a plan that is balanced to bring down our deficit in a balanced way that puts a certain amount of revenues on the table, much smaller percentage than cuts, a 1-to-3 ratio roughly, where he asks people, millionaires, to pay a little more to help pay down the deficit, because we have to start bringing that down. And he's also talked about the need to cut waste and spending and make those investments we need in clean energy technology, in our schools, training and marrying up retraining programs for workers who can go to community colleges, partner with businesses in their communities for the training that workers in those areas need. You could put 2 million people through retraining programs and get them to work through that program. The president has put that on the table. That's part of the plan going forward as well.
What does your survey work show about who the persuadables are? How many of them are there, and and are they going to make the difference? Is it really as small a number as the conventional wisdom holds?
Look, Bill, we've said from the beginning this was going to be a very competitive election. We always knew that. When we won with 53% of the vote in 2008, President Obama was only the 4th Democrat in history to get to 53% of the vote. And in the last 6 elections we had, only 2 presidents got that high. First President Bush got to 53%, President Obama got to 53%, and everything in between, the only one who ever got to 50 was George W. Bush in 2004, and he barely got there. So we have very close elections. This one will be as well. I believe as we head into the last 9 weeks, there are still millions of persuadable voters, but as a percentage of the electorate, it is a smaller and smaller group. I think we're probably looking at, if you look at people who are truly undecided voters today and truly persuadable today, we're probably barely breaking double digits, if that. I think we're probably in the high single digits right now. If you look at soft Obama voters, soft Romney voters, and undecided voters, I think you're probably maybe at 10%, 9 or 10%.
And what is their demographic makeup? Who are they?
If I told you that, I'd be telling Neil Newhouse that. I'll let Neil try to figure that out for himself.
My guess is Neil knows.
Neil may have a different view.
I mean, are we looking at white suburban women with college degrees? Are we looking at
I think there's a lot of when you start trying to define them, there is some overlap among groups, but white suburban women always have been an important part of the presidential elections in this 21st century, going back to the Gore-Bush race. So
they tend to vote. They tend to be late deciders. Is that still the case this year?
They tend to, although I believe people have decided earlier in this race. I think a lot of this race is already locked in. I think that's why we're looking at 9 weeks out, even going into the Republican convention. This number of undecided or persuadable voters hasn't really changed even from the start of the Republican convention. So I think you've got a lot more voters who are locked in. But you're seeing younger voters getting more galvanized now as they're returning back to campuses. More of them are registering to vote. More of them are participating in the system again. They're volunteering in the campaign again. I think we obviously will continue to do work to turn out our voters, our core voters, young voters, African Americans, Latino voters. But I think white suburban women, I think we did very well, by the way, the end of the last campaign with white independent rural voters. Our last target that we were chasing down in October were white independent rural voters, women in particular. And President Obama actually did higher with rural voters than any president, I think, since Jimmy Carter. So we're pretty good about who we're targeting. I think there are some groups that you traditionally see, but we've got a few others that we believe are in our zone right now.
Here's a softball. Did you try to measure Romney's bounce?
There are so many wonderful public polls coming out every hour that you almost can just sit back and see what happens. Look, I think there are a couple of things going on. I think we've pushed. The answer to this is no one is seeing any kind of bounce. No one saw a big bounce from Paul Ryan being put on the ticket. There are two things happening. One, I think that their convention had gaps in it from a message perspective and some inconsistencies as you went from day to day and speaker to speaker sometime. I don't think they created a real thread about what they wanted to do other than the drumbeat on Obama was the most consistent thing. Obama failed here, Obama did. It was all pretty negative. I don't think that helped them, and I think the data shows that it doesn't help them. But there are other structural factors that are, kind of minimizing the bounce that you get from these things. I think when John Kennedy was nominated for president, it was around July 15th in 1960. I think even when Bill Clinton had his convention in 1996, I think it was around July 20th. You know, we're past Labor Day already. What was the traditional beginning of the campaign? You kind of went from the conventions, you gathered steam, and then you went out there and you campaigned. And here we are, you know, a few days past Labor Day, and we haven't, you know, officially had the renomination of President Obama. So I think the later you push them, it also, and with the more money being spent up front, I think you're going to start, if this pattern continues, to see bumps minimize, because of the schedule and the process and things getting pushed back. People are going to dig in to the campaign sooner, and they're going to align themselves sooner.
We're going to take some questions from the crowd,
Sure.
but first I just want to follow up on that real quick. Given everything you're saying, with the very low return on investment for either parties, is this perhaps the last time we're going to see a 3 or 4 day convention? Do we have to reinvent this puppy?
Well, by the way, we've had 4-day conventions for a really long time. And I think, you know, now we went to a 3-day convention, not because of the unfortunate hurricane that hit Tampa. They had to shrink their convention, and I think they probably found that, you know, you could get everything into 3 days, and you may see that. Especially as you go later in the campaign. You want to be out campaigning with real people. You got to do the business you have to do at your party. But if you can do that more efficiently and then go back out and talk to Americans who want to be hearing from you, then that's what you should be doing.
Didn't you guys briefly consider like 1 day in remote, several locations, more grassroots convention?
I think that was discussed early on, but I think I also think it was shelved pretty early on.
I just wonder if that's a model going forward. Do we have any questions out there? We have one right there, yeah. They'll bring a mic around to anybody who wants to ask a question.
Hi, my name is Kerry Trainer. I'm a public school teacher in New York City. I teach AP US Government. I apologize. Oh, sorry. My name is Kerry Trainer. I'm a public school teacher in New York City. I teach AP US Government. And clearly this semester I'm going to be focusing a lot on the election. I'll be dealing with polling a lot. My question is actually to you. Sasha Issenberg wrote an op-ed in the New York Times a few days ago where he quoted you, and his thesis was generally that, you know, like you said, 10% of the electorate is up for grabs, and each campaign has their own way of getting at that 10%. And Issenberg's thesis was the media is far behind where the campaigns are, and there's been a transition in the last 10 years where campaigns have become much more sophisticated in terms of polling, and the media has just not been able to keep up with it. I was wondering if you could say a few words about that.
Well, yeah, but I don't know how many of you saw the article, but just to clarify, he wasn't just saying the media can't keep up with it on the polling side. His article was about the technology of campaigns becoming more advanced generally, and the campaigns incorporating that technology to their advantage for legitimate campaign purposes. All of us are doing it. And, you know, you got to remember the media covers these things once every 4 years or once every 6 years. This is the business people are in politics, is to win elections. So in between the 4 years, we spend our time, you know, maximizing the techniques we can use to communicate with voters, particularly in a more cluttered environment. You know, someone asked me last night, you know, if there are 65 million Democratic voters, you know, with the improvement of voter lists, your ability to update your list, how many of them can you communicate with directly, you know, in a one-on-one conversation? You know, and it's probably not quite universal, but it's getting pretty close very fast, so that when we talk about this TV stuff, there are a whole lot of ways voters are being talked to on a very personal level, which I think is probably good for the process, but it's very hard to keep up with that if you're not making investments in the kinds of techniques you use and the kind of data analytics you use, the techniques of micro-targeting that you would use. Those things are big investments. It's more than just doing a poll once a month, and a lot of that work is done using, you know, database building and database modeling, and then going back and polling and setting up models on those voters. So it wasn't just about media polling. I think the challenge, and what Sasha didn't quote me on, which I said, because there are two ends of the spectrum, and he quoted me very fairly, but there was a second part to one thing I said. Yeah, these techniques are advancing, but there's also an increasing pressure on journalists, and he wanted to talk to me because I was with the Daily News as a political reporter for many years. But there's an increasing pressure on the other side of the equation for journalists, some of whom I've known for 20, 25 years, to get out there within the next hour with whatever you have, instead of trying to think it through and get to the better place about informing your readers. You know, the web is a great blessing for the way we can dispense information, but it's putting pressures on political reporters in a way where you put that out there, even if you want to do a longer think piece, you know, the news changes so rapidly now, and the ability of your editors to say, okay, we know you want to go deeper into that, but, you know, ABC has this one, or the Des Moines Register has this story, go chase that. And so they're under more pressure to be more immediate. And I think that, you know, in conversations I've had with every journalist I know, they understand that pressure, they work through it. I think most of them do a fantastic job of working through it. We got to have a strong media and a strong fourth estate, frankly. And we need the media to hold any of us accountable when our ads are not telling the truth. I mean, there are things people need. We need, you know, honest brokers in the conversation. I mean, that would be something that could be a way for the media to counter some of the, you know, daily pressure, is to really figure out how do you establish your bona fides again as a real honest broker of what's being said and what's being put out there.
I could quickly vouch for the former argument. In 2005, I did a book with Matthew Dowd, who worked on the Bush campaign, and did a real deep dive on their micro-targeting. And when I got done with that, I really understood at a really deep level what the Bush campaign had done to find and talk to its voters. That's all irrelevant now. Not totally irrelevant, but it's moved past me. I'd have to do it again because things are moving so quickly. Right here?
And I'll try to give shorter answers so we can get more questions.
There you go.
If that helps.
My name's Ben Potter from the Australian Financial Review. I'm interested in the degree of gender disparity between the two candidates' support levels. Is it anomalous, and do you see it changing perhaps when a new generation of Republican leaders comes along? Because it seems quite stark. 10%. Obama has a 10% advantage among women. Romney has, or thereabouts. Romney 10 to 12% among men. That doesn't sound very natural to me.
Well, look, let me on the last premise. No candidate starts with a gender gap among women in this country. You work for it and you earn it, and you talk to them about issues that matter to them in their lives. Any Democrat who went through the 2010 election can tell you that, because there was no gender gap. Women broke pretty much 50-50. The reason there's a gender gap in this election, and I do think there is it works very much on the candidate level. There is also a party problem that the Republicans have right now, but even on the candidate level. Here you've had a president who signed into law. The first bill he signed was a bill that would give women equal pay in the workplace, the Lilly Ledbetter Act. In fact, you'll hear Lilly Ledbetter speak at the convention tonight. This is a woman who in her life was underpaid for doing the same work as men, and was never able to recoup that money. And she did this for her granddaughter. She fought for this bill. I think when you talk about decisions about women's health care, they're not just decisions about health care. When you go out and say you want to get rid of Planned Parenthood, there are women in this country who are breadwinners, who are the primary breadwinners, who get mammograms, who get pap smears, who go there for the treatment they can't get anywhere else. And that not only keeps them healthy and strong for their families, it keeps them working in the economy and on their jobs. And when you have one president who seems to understand that and truly believes it, and another one who seems not to understand that, that's when you earn the votes of women. And when you stand up and fight for them, you get their vote. When you don't, you don't. Now, on the party level, I believe they do have a structural problem. I think there are a lot of issues with young women that they are tremendously out of touch on, and this is, you know, more generational, but it is also has some universality. When you don't embrace global warming and the idea that we have some environmental threats that are going to destroy, you look at floods, you look at fires, you look at the hurricanes and the degree of them. There are men and women who feel that you're incredibly out of touch if you don't understand those dynamics and if you're not fully committed to creating clean energy. When you take a position that is extremely harsh on how you want to treat children who were brought to this country as infants, who have raised their hands and pledged allegiance to America since the time they were in kindergarten, and who want to stay in this country and be Americans, and you want to veto a bill that would let them stay there and become the kinds of citizens that the executive at Microsoft was talking about, who can become the engineers who will work in your tech industry, who'll serve in your military, and you want to veto that, you lose a whole lot of people. But these issues are also very important to women. So I think you earn those votes. The Republican Party has had a consistent problem on some of these issues, but we've been fighting those issues out, and that's why we have a gender gap in this race.
Let's circle back to the top real quick. How conscious is the president about the risk of talking about race too much?
I don't know what the question means, Ron. The president goes out, he's president of the United States. He talks about what's important to the American people every day. He talks about what's on their minds. He talks about their lives. This is a guy who, from the day he got into the Oval Office, said, I want 10 letters a night from people to read. I want them handed to me. He keeps them, he reads them. He apparently brings them up to people in conversation on the White House staff when he's talking about them. This is a president who is focused on the lives of American people day in and day out. Look, this guy, 4 years ago...
I'm just struck, if I really just to make sure I understand the question, I'm struck by the fact that President Clinton really made an effort, and it was a big part of who he was, to talk about race relations. President Obama doesn't seem to put quite as much emphasis on it. I'm just wondering why.
People govern and run in different times. When one of the most controversial issues that President Clinton had to deal with back in the 90s was reaction to an affirmative action case in the United States Supreme Court. He also, the African-American community embraced Bill Clinton in a way, and still do, very affectionately and deservedly so, as the first black president of America. You know, it was a change. He was young, he was hip, and he was bringing that. He played his saxophone on MTV, and young people, African Americans, saw somebody here who was going to be the next generation of leader in America. And with President Obama, we're now, from the first time President Clinton got elected, it's 20 years later. President Obama comes into office at a time, 4 years ago we were sitting here, Lehman Brothers hadn't collapsed yet. We're already losing 500,000 jobs a month, but we're 13 days away from the Lehman Brothers collapse and our entire financial system being brought to its knees. Our economy was shaken to the ground. That has been the issue that's front and center, and that's what President Obama is focused on.
Question right here, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. Martin Klingst of the German weekly Die Zeit. Polling is one thing, and the other thing is voter turnout. I just came back from Colorado, and you hear people talking about a silent majority. That means Hispanics say they will vote for Barack Obama if they vote, but the voter turnout might be very low. Is that a problem you're seeing?
We had a turnout operation, and we said in 2008 it was going to be a turnout operation unlike anybody had ever seen, and people say, oh, you say that all the time, and then we turned out the vote. You were also in Colorado, where the crowd was twice the size that was anticipated if you went to the big event. There were 14,000 people there, and a crowd estimate early in the day was 7,000. You have some of the voting groups that people say they're worried about turnout with Latino voters, African-American voters, young voters. We have not seen, I don't believe there's any enthusiasm gap there. I think they're engaging more as it gets closer, like they historically do. This is when they pay attention to the race. Young kids are back at colleges. They're registering to vote again. They're turning out. And at every stop the president has been at this week, the crowds have been bigger. We have to work very hard at it, but we have going back to the sophisticated models, we have pretty sophisticated ways of identifying who our GOTV targets are, who our persuasion targets are, and making sure we spend the right amount of time communicating what we need to communicate to get those voters who are strong Obama voters to the polls and those who are persuadable to come over to our side. And you're not painting everybody with the same brush and the same message when you do that, and that's where some of that individual messaging comes into play. I think we'll have a very good turnout operation, and it'll meet the goals we need to win.
Joel, thank you very much for coming, and Bill, this was a really good conversation. Thank you for your questions. We're going to have a panel next that I think Elizabeth will introduce. Round of applause for...
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks very much to Joel Benenson of Benenson Strategy Group. We'll now move to a panel discussion, and for the panel discussion, this group is going to be joined by Beth Reinhardt, political correspondent of National Journal, as the third moderator. Beth will be joining Ron Fournier, editor-in-chief of National Journal, and Bill Plant, senior White House correspondent for CBS News. Also on this panel, we have a broader group of pollsters, including Celinda Lake, who is president of Lake Research Partners. Margie O'Mara, who's founder of Momentum Analysis LLC, and John Anzalone, who's partner at Anzalone List Research. And I would remind you again, please do tweet your comments or questions to #DailyBriefings. We will be taking some questions, and if the microphone comes to you, just please speak into it directly and give us your name and organization. And thanks again to those who are watching online at nationaljournal.com and theatlantic.com and Fora TV, and our TV viewers at C-SPAN. So please join me in re-welcoming our moderators and the pollsters for this next segment.
Hi. Ron, we moved you from the right to the left, from the left to the right.
Pardon me?
We moved you from the left to the right.
He's bipartisan. Can you all hear me? Is that good? Okay. All right, well, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to start off with the same question we asked our Republican pollsters in Tampa last week, which is, when you look at the polls and you see where which demographic groups Obama is doing well, where he's doing not so well, what number is the scariest number to you? Which one keeps you up at night? You want to start?
Sure. I think there are two voting groups that keep me up at night. Well, three, I guess. One, pollsters all think in threes, right? One of them is seniors. There's no question about white seniors. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Thank you. So I think the first group of voters that keeps us up at night is seniors, particularly white seniors. Now, the president lost white seniors 4 years ago. We had some bounce back with the Ryan vote. Or the Ryan nomination, Medicare. I think the Republicans have been very aggressive coming back on us. And the real question is, we have to make up for seniors with our youth vote. And when you're not sure about how high the youth turnout is going to be, that makes the senior vote even more important. The seniors are starting to drift back a little bit. There's some evidence that the welfare ad may have had some impact with white seniors. So that's the number that really keeps me up. And of course, it keeps us up this year, but it can keep us up for 2 years, because in 2014 it'll be even more important. Related to the seniors are white non-college women. White non-college educated independent women, I think, will be the decisive vote in this election. They make up a disproportionate amount of the undecided vote. They will be the swing voter who will decide this election. Very worried about the economy. Also think that the first president with a Swiss bank account totally out of touch with their lives. So the question is, who's really on their side? And it's not going to be macroeconomics, it's going to be microeconomics. And I think the Republicans really failed at delivering a view of how, at kitchen table economics, how you're going to make her life better. We have a challenge in the next 3 days to do that. I think starting off with Michelle Obama, then Bill Clinton, and then ending with Vice President Biden and the President. I think we have a stellar lineup to make that argument, but we better get it made. And the third number I'd say is enthusiasm. The Democratic enthusiasm has been lagging behind the Republican enthusiasm. Their convention obviously trying to solidify their enthusiasm. They're having trouble with that. I don't think Clint Eastwood did much to ignite their enthusiasm, and since he was their dominant speaker election the last night. But we've got to make sure that our enthusiasm catches up with theirs.
Either one of you want to?
Yeah, you know, those would be my top two as well, in terms of not just the presidential, but I think Democratic politics. And so, since Celinda talked about seniors and talked about non-college educated women, I would look at it a little differently, so not to repeat it, and look geographically. Because when you take a look at Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, those were great states for Obama and Democrats in some ways in 2008. And so geographically, those become really important. And, you know, the Democratic Party has to move beyond being kind of a Northeast, Midwest party. These are continued battleground states, and we'll want to have them be battleground states above and beyond national politics just at the presidential level. You see that in Virginia with Kaine, who's just a great U.S. Senate candidate and just absolutely holding his own. The other thing I'll say, and I'll pass it to Margie, is that Celinda talked about enthusiasm, and I look a little less at enthusiasm, and I try to focus a little bit more on pragmatism, and that kind of goes in terms of, again, your message at the end of the day when people go into that voting booth is, who's going to look out for me? Who's a little bit more like me? I think we sometimes overblow enthusiasm because politics starts so early, and we're sitting there talking about enthusiasm gaps in, March. The reality is Labor Day is that when the bell rings and people do re-engage, but they'll re-engage at a pragmatism level. That small amount of undecideds, I think, will come to us because of pragmatism.
I would agree with everything that Celinda and John just said. I think a few other things to just touch on that. First is the young women and moms. And so my firm has done a lot of work with Walmart moms and studying them. And we did survey work in 2011, and we've done a series of focus groups this year. And in the survey work, we asked a question. We did Walmart moms, and we also looked at voters overall. And we said, are you more concerned about your household economy, or are you more concerned about the national economy and the nation's debt? And Walmart moms said 2 to 1 more concerned about their own personal economic situation. Voters overall, about half said they were concerned about the national economy. And so that was one of the biggest differences we saw between moms and voters overall. And they aren't just downscale moms, they are across the board. And so, but they tend to be swing. I mean, they have swung over the last few elections. So they really are looking at all the women in particular, how their household finances and their household decision making, and how that really changes what they're doing from day to day, and how that affects how they view the political debate. The other thing I would mention too, in addition to the things that these guys mentioned, is how people feel about right track, wrong track, and that view. I mean, that's something we've been kind of in a. I mean, we had a low point in terms of wrong track right before Obama took office, but still, obviously, the nation is going through tough times, and you see that with how the right track, wrong track number has been, stable in a bad way for a long time.
Let's follow up a little bit on geography. It's Monday before the election. Where does President Obama's plane land, and where does Romney land his plane?
Well, here's the one thing I think we do lose perspective. I mean, we all know the battleground states. I mean, there's all you have to do is take a look at where
you got 2 on that day. Where do you go?
Where do you go?
What city do you go to?
Well, listen, I don't know where he's going. I would go again. I mean, I think Virginia, Ohio, Florida, these are really important. But let's put in perspective, the 2008 victory was 364 electoral votes. That means Obama, and we don't plan to do this, but can lose the 2 big enchiladas of Florida and Ohio, can lose North Carolina and Virginia and Indiana and still win this. And so there is a big map out there, and I say that because Romney does have to get an inside straight. I think people forget the magnitude of the win and what Romney has to do. That doesn't mean, President Obama and the campaign takes anything for granted. We're going to win Virginia, which means we could lose Iowa and New Hampshire, for example. So it's a big map. I mean, we're going to be all those places. We have 60-something days, and he's going to hit every one of those battleground states. And guess what? So is Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan.
I think what Mitt Romney definitely should not do is what he did yesterday, which is go boating instead of go out and talk to regular voters on Labor Day.
Or take a week off to debate prep. I think he goes, well, first of all, if it's only 2 steps, then that's a campaign 10 years ago. So
point.
4 states now. But I think he goes Ohio, and I would add Colorado to the mix. And then I think also what's interesting is that Wisconsin has gotten more into play because of Ryan on the ticket, and I think he hits Wisconsin to keep that ticket under pressure. I think some of this is not only to what are the states we need to pick up, but as John said, what are the states we're going to block them in? And
Are you surprised
candidate.
that Ryan has put Wisconsin in play?
Not if you went through the recall of Scott Walker, as we did with Labor. You're not surprised. It's a very swing state. And then Ryan has also held on to a blue-collar district and has a lot of personal appeal there. But I think that in the end, it's going to be less Ryan, the local guy, and more the Romney-Ryan ticket. That's a lot weaker ticket in Wisconsin.
Could Romney put Michigan in play too?
No, he can't. And they've spent a lot of money up there, I think, Restore for America, and they can't put it in play. It's just too far gone. And I think they've wasted money up there, and I think they tried to bait the Obama campaign into spending money, and they didn't. But I did want to make one other thing about where they would land. that nowadays, you have these 8 or 10 battleground states, and it's not even just the state. Now it's the media market. Right. It's Charlotte, or it's Washington, D.C., or it's Richmond, or it's Tampa and it's Orlando. I mean, presidential campaigns now aren't even really, listen, they communicate in the entire state, don't get me wrong, but you can take a look, the public, and see where the intensity is within each state and see geographically, again, not only are 8 or 10 states going to get most of the attention, but there's media markets within the state. It's really quite fascinating.
I mean, the other thing, too, is to go to, in these top media markets, and there are a lot of good choices, go to a college campus or someplace in a city where you can really, improve and boost turnout and enthusiasm, field effort, all of that locally.
I wanted to ask you about the demographic makeup of the electorate in November. As you know, in 2008, we saw a very different electorate than what we had seen in presidential elections before. But knowing what you know about the enthusiasm gap, for whatever it's worth, you may think it's going to close. Can you really expect an electorate that looks like it did in 2008? And if you could specifically address black turnout, I'm interested in your thoughts on that. Anybody want to take that?
Well, I mean, one thing about the thing that's really driving, honestly, the change in the composition of the electorate, as much as anything, is demographic changes, and that's the real story here. I mean, half of America unmarried, the incredible rising tide of Latino voters, the incredible rising tide of Asian American voters. I mean, Asian American voters turnout looks like it's going to be up again. No enthusiasm gap in that community, for example. So, we are looking at any election, and 2010 is going to end up being the deviant election, I think. Any election in the 2000s is going to look very different from, Ronald Reagan's electorate because of the tremendous demographic changes in this country. And you've got a situation now where you've got 2/3 plus of seniors white, but you've got 73% of the school kids in California, children of color. These changes are marching relentlessly on.
We know they're coming, but the question is whether the numbers are going to translate into power at the polls.
Well,
they already are.
I think, yeah, that's right. They already are. And I think that, for example, North Carolina was won by Obama. I think that the story at the end of the day will be one will win it again, but people aren't thinking about, for example, the number of minorities that have been registered here, or that, if you can move the Hispanic vote from 1% to 3% in North Carolina, it means a lot at the end of the day. And so I think one of the storylines at the end of the day, potentially because of exit polls, although we tend to have problems with some of the exit poll numbers, is the minority vote again. And it's really not being talked about as much as it was in 2008, but you have to remember, the electorate in North Carolina is more African American than it was in 2008. It's more Hispanic than it was in 2008, and that becomes important.
And if I can just add one thing, and I apologize, Marjorie, you know that this is a threat, because that's why the conservatives are so aggressive about the voter suppression efforts. If there's one indicator that, yes, the turnout has the potential it did in 2008, it's the relentless degree to which they're trying to have ID, cut down on registration, not use student IDs, end early vote. I mean, that's how you know the threat that this changing demographic represents.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and it's one that ultimately a lot of voters are not going to be based their voting decisions on which party is, using voter ID laws to try and prevent turnout. But it's something that is so important, can really make a difference in a lot of these races. I think, the other thing too is, I think people want to, this is just a sense, right, of the coverage, like place a bit blame on the feet of young people and minorities for not, staying with Obama, and that if he doesn't reach 53% and he doesn't have the same support, that somehow, the communities have turned on him. And I just don't, I don't feel that's, well, one, I don't think, as Joel was talking about previously, I mean, that 53% is not, it's not the same as a midterm re-election, rather, goal. And it seems sort of uniquely placed in that discussion at young voters and minority voters that I think seems a little out of sync with how, the electorate's working.
Do you all think that Mitt Romney's campaign is playing the race card with welfare reform?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, I think it's fairly blatant that they are trying to appeal, with what is an untruth, and why else would they be playing it so hard?
They may not. I mean, I can't speak for their motivations and whether they are knowingly playing the race card or whether. But even if they aren't knowingly, they should be able to think that through and wonder and think about whether or not what the effect that has on the dialogue, how that affects the way the Romney campaign is viewed, what they may be doing of alienating minority voters. I mean, whether or not they are deliberately doing it or they're accidentally doing it, they should know that that's
they are moving voters by doing it.
Oh, I don't know that they're moving voters. There are certain things that they do for their base as well. Paul Ryan's one of them, right? And so we haven't seen necessarily that, and I'm talking about the public polls, I'm not talking about internal polls, that is doing some great damage.
I'm curious, and why do you think, and you guys all know Joel real well, why wasn't Joel willing to say that they're playing the race card, and why doesn't he think it's affecting voters at all? Why isn't he as willing as you guys to say, yeah, they're playing a race card? What do you think?
Well, I don't
what's
think
going on
any
there?
of us is going to comment on Joel. You'll have to ask Joel about Joel. You can quote us back to Joel, but I think...
Why would some Democrats be afraid of saying they're playing the race card?
I don't know that they would be. I think there's probably a sincere disagreement on our side about whether this is happening. I mean, I think there is an honest disagreement in our party, and we talked about this last night, and honestly, talking to you kind of changed my own view of it.
That's never happened before.
Whether or not, actually more than you know, whether or not, we already lost any voters who would be influenced by the race card. Whether we already lost, I think that's part of the honest debate in our party. And there clearly racism is alive and well in this country, and it does influence votes. So I think you'd have to ask Joel.
Margie was talking about Walmart moms, non-college educated, maybe a little more downscale white women. The reality is that there's constantly been this tension, I don't even know if it's tension, in terms of decision-making process, is that the Democrats speak to them on economic issues, on health care, on education, on fair wages, the economy. And the Republicans talk to them on wedge issues. They talk to them on immigration. They talk to them on, God and things like, prayer in school or patriotism. And they talk to them on things like welfare reform. And they're trying to touch a nerve that basically, isolates the fact that a lot of middle-class people feel like they're on their own. And we're trying to do the pragmatic thing and talk about them meeting their needs, and the Republicans are trying to attack it at, the worst possible angle to rip them away. It's been going on for decades. This is nothing new. And you can call it race, you can call it whatever you want. I agree with Margie in terms of the motivation, but they're playing a card, which is a wedge card, to get at them at an emotional, visceral level that has nothing to do at the end of the day with their economic interests.
The thing is that what it's tapping into is this worry that a lot of people have, which is somebody's getting a better deal than me. Somebody can get ahead of the line, literally. That's what people say in focus groups. Some people get to the head of the line for support, government assistance. They literally feel, and it expresses this nervousness, anxiety that somebody's has an advantage in life that I can't get, that I don't have. And when the Republicans use that very reasonable anxiety that a lot of Americans have to their advantage. I mean, they're hiding the fact that the person who really is getting the better deal than anybody is Mitt Romney. I mean, Mitt Romney truly, they're hiding that piece instead, having encouraging, middle-class voters to, duke it out for themselves.
Well, I would take it even further. I don't think they're even hiding it. I think they're trying to deal. I think they know that if they're double digits behind on being for the middle class, they have a very hard time winning this election. So they're trying to minimize that distinction. Everybody knows the rich are getting ahead now. They are ahead of the line. They got special passes. And Mitt Romney, first and foremost, with Bain Capital and not releasing his taxes, et cetera. I think they're trying to divert attention from that because they know it's a vulnerability for them.
Okay, you're doing a real good job of explaining the dog whistles that the Republicans are putting out. Help me understand what Barack Obama and his advisors might be worried about as far as messages they might put out, dog whistles they might put out if the president talks about race too much. If the president were to stand up and say that's race baiting. Is there some concern among Democrats of sending out the wrong signal by talking about race and racial politics too much?
Listen, I think that, and I can't speak for the campaign, but I think that when you get hit like that, what you do is you give the facts, okay? And the response has been given the facts, that in fact, what they're saying is not true. And at the end of the day, that becomes, I think, the most important thing for American voters to hear is what is the truth. And I think that, you know, when voters look at Barack Obama, they're beyond now just looking at a black president. They are looking at the president of the United States. And someday it will be a woman, someday it will be a Hispanic, someday it will be another white male. And I think the Americans have a good grasp of that. And you know, and I think what Joel said is right on target, that, you know, that is not a priority in terms of trying to message on the president's race.
I think the other thing is when you're talking about any ism, I mean, you know, Marjorie and I have both been in situations where we've been, all three of us, where we've been treated sexistly. Frankly, it's a lot more powerful when John speaks up and calls it out, or you call it out, Ron, than if we call it out, because then they say, well, the girls are calling sexism. I think that's just true with any ism in our culture.
I just wanted to push back on the idea that the Republicans are the only ones using the wedge issues. I mean, if you look at Obama's appeals to women, they're going to take away your abortion rights. If you look at the ads that are aimed at Hispanics, you know, he's going to deport you. I mean, how is that any different than what the Republicans are doing?
Well, one thing is they brought it up, we didn't. I mean, honestly, if you had said a year ago, if John had come to us a year ago, Marjorie and myself, and said, okay, we're going to get to run on the war on women, these guys are going to do away with birth control, Planned Parenthood, and everything else, I think we would have said, John, that was settled in 1960. We're really going to have to update our campaigns a little bit. I don't think they'll be that stupid. This is a moderate governor who didn't have that record in Massachusetts. I mean, honestly, this is the gift that keeps on giving. These stands were unimaginable 2 years ago. We would never have based a strategy on it because we would never have thought we would have been handed this strategy.
Yeah, I mean, the difference is the Romney campaign welfare ads are not true. I mean, those are based on falsehoods. The work requirement piece is, you know, proven to be false. Now, you know, are there Republicans who, you know, had a hearing about birth control and only invited men and said, you know, women have to ask their employers to get birth control? That happens. I mean, that actually happened.
But the same fact checkers that have said the welfare ad isn't true have also said that the Obama ads that say he would outlaw abortion in the cases of rape and incest are also not true.
Well, and I think Joel hit it right on the head. If you want to outlaw, or if you want to reverse Roe v. Wade, I mean, that kind of, you know, ends that discussion. I mean, I don't know where else you can take that.
And Mitt Romney's had a variety of different positions on abortion, and Paul Ryan has his own farther to the right positions on abortion. So I think that's different than Barack Obama. You know, Barack Obama hasn't had 10 different positions on getting rid of the work requirement.
Well, I also don't think that contraception, et cetera, is a wedge issue. I mean, my 20-year-old daughter, you know, when I'm emailing her back and forth at college, and I emailed her something from Sandra Fluke, and she emailed me back, she is my hero. That's not a wedge issue. I mean, she's doing something real for standing up for this young lady, and that becomes important. That is touching their life in some way.
You know, one other thing too with that falls under the quote-unquote war on women is the women's health parts of health reform, and it's beyond abortion and birth control. It's mandatory maternity care coverage, mandatory breast cancer coverage, which are among the most popular pieces of the reform altogether. And so when, you know, Republicans say they want to repeal it, they're saying, and, you know, you've had some of them actually say, well, I don't need that, so why should we have coverage for that? So, you know, they have actually, in their own voices, said those things are not priorities.
We've talked a lot about the Democratic base groups. Let's talk a little bit about the undecided voters. Joel Benenson earlier didn't want to give away his trade secrets, but I think y'all know some things about the undecided voters and can talk about that and what are the challenges in reaching them when they are this tiny sliver of the electorate. Whoever.
I mean, you know, they're late deciders. They may not all vote. They are going to be lower information, typically. And, they're going to need even more and more touches. They're going to need even more and more advertising, even more and more direct contact. They're going to need, they want specifics, but they're not necessarily out looking for specifics. So they need a lot of attention. As we're headed, they're going to be watching the debates or hoping to get some more information from the debates. And they're really going to decide in the last few weeks.
The other thing I would say is there are two things about them. First of all, the debates will influence them, but it frankly won't be watching the debates themselves. It will be the news reporting of the debates. So the news reporting of the debate will have enormous influence on their attitudes. And the best historical example of that is 1976 when Gerald Ford put Poland in the wrong part of the world. Most of America was just fine with it. Hell, geography wasn't their strength either. But by the next morning, they had totally reinterpreted whether he won or lost the debate. The second thing is, honestly, I think one of the reasons that Joel was being careful is back to the point of micro-targeting. I mean, I think these campaigns, first of all, you have 25% of Romney voters who said they would consider someone else and 15% of Obama voters. So I think that television is actually less trying to influence the undecided voters and more trying to keep that 25 and 15 back in their camps. And then the second thing is we don't target anymore. We wouldn't go after 10% of the vote with a TV ad per se. Both campaigns, I think, are going to go to the ground. And now we have the ability with micro-targeting and modeling, et cetera. We don't have to go after non-college educated women over 55 whites, which I just said was, I think, the key target voter. We'll go into households. I mean, they know the doors they're going to knock on in Ohio today, and frankly, they have to schedule around each other because the Romney knocker is going to be right in front of the Obama knocker.
They know exactly what to say to push the right button.
Exactly.
The undecided vote is so small that it really does, and targeting is so different than it was when Bush and Rove revolutionized it, that it really does come down to this, one woman in the Columbus media market who works part-time out of her house, has 2 kids, and likes Merlot. I mean, it's getting to the point where, $1 billion is going to be spent on just this one woman in the Columbus media market. I mean, it really is that small. And if you go back to literally the beginning of the year, okay, go to any of these websites that do the national polling, I mean, this has been a straight line. I mean, I've been calling it teasingly, this is the within the margin of error election at the presidential side. I mean, it's, it has not moved but a couple points up and down. And if you go into the battleground states here, even in North Carolina, it's just basically, kind of stayed there in the mid 40s, and Obama's been ahead, in most places by a couple, 2-3 points, bigger in places like Michigan, et cetera. And so there's just not a whole lot of movement with already $1 billion spent.
I mean, we talked to some undecided or swing-ish undecided Walmart moms, and they, and we asked them, what are you thinking about? Like, how do you break this down? How are you trying to weigh between your 2 options? And, they were really physically grappling with it. They said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm really struggling. On the one hand, I feel that, I'm disappointed in Obama. I'm disappointed how the economy's doing. I feel that, I wanted to believe. I really, I had great expectations. He walked into the Titanic. But, I'm not sure if Mitt Romney is the guy. He's not, I can't connect with him. I don't feel like he's, speaking to me. I don't feel like he's fighting for people like me. I'm not sure if he's, he might be too conservative. And, those are the things that they're really, they're trying to weigh as they head to the election. And, I mean, if I'm the Romney campaign, I'm thinking it's very difficult. That it's very difficult for him to, have people warm up to him who haven't warmed up to him yet in the next few months. So, I think that puts, President Obama's going to lay out, or continue to emphasize some of his plans this week. You didn't hear Romney do that last week, so we'll see how that changes, headed into November.
Well, we're going to take some questions now. Got a few more minutes. Young lady right here.
Hi, I'm Joni James from the Tampa Bay Times. In Florida, though, already we have seen voter registration among Democrats was about 209,000 for the 13 months before the 04 and 08 elections. It was only about 11,000 through July 1. So you've lost a lot of ground there. Democrats, however, actually gained during that. Republicans actually gained during that same period. So now that they have a judge outlawed the third-party voter registration in Florida, but can you make up that loss in the few months you have left?
Well, that's not a loss, by the way. I mean, the fact that you did that, in 2008 and didn't do as much in the last 13 months doesn't mean that that same number was available. So I think that you have to put that universe in your base, and that is a really big feather in your cap at that point, to start with. I mean, that's still why there's big advantages in certain states, is because what was done in the past.
I think the thing we have to worry about, I would just build on what John said. I'm not so worried that we didn't register 209,000, because once you've registered them, you can't, hopefully, unless Rick Scott has his say, they stay registered. The issue is the mobile end of that. So I think what we're concentrating on now, and what you watched the campaign in the last 2 weeks, the two groups that are particularly mobile in that are young people. They're not where they were 4 years ago, and their student IDs don't count in a lot of states, and unmarried women, who also have had a 33% mobility rate. So that's the issue, is going in more and targeting the ones, and that's why so many of these vets have been thrown off the rolls when they've tried these purges, including Rick Scott's purges here. So what we got to focus on is the mobile end of that, and with all the new techniques of change and address, et cetera, we can go in, we can go get the ones who have moved. We have the time to do that if they don't keep changing the laws in ways that we would consider unconstitutional.
Gentleman right here, please.
Hi, Peter Bagan, Scan Health Plan. So at the Republican convention, Paul Ryan threw down the gauntlet on Medicare, and apparently it was based on polling that we discussed at this event in Tampa. I wonder if you could share with us your idea on how Medicare issue will play out and your polling on the issue.
Well, we have done extensive polling on Medicare, and some of that polling has been released for the National Committee to Protect Medicare and Social Security, and I think they'll be doing some more polling. First of all, to say that Ryan would end traditional Medicare, make it harder for you to choose your doctor, and leave you on your own to negotiate with your insurance company, and deliver you a $6,000 bill for the privilege of that, is horrific to voters. And I think the Republicans know that that's a very strong argument against them. That's why they've been so aggressive, saying falsely that we would cut $728 billion from Medicare for ACA, when in fact what we did was put it back into Medicare. So they know this is a dangerous argument. I think at the presidential level, it is certainly part of the dialogue in terms of, going back to your original question, trying to get that senior vote back. But frankly, where I think you'll really see it play out is at the congressional and Senate level. For, all year long, we've been trying to tell people Ryan, 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 and people are going, who the hell's Ryan? I have no idea. Who's Ryan? My neighbor's named Ryan. What did he do? Now, we don't have to define Ryan anymore. Everybody knows who Ryan is. So the Ryan-Romney budget on Medicare is a big issue in these congressional and Senate races, and watch for it to hurt a lot of Republican incumbents in the House.
I mean, there's so much else in there too. I mean, that's there's the Medicare debate, which I think polls have shown that that however you've asked about it, it's people oppose Ryan's plans on Medicare, but also so much else in there, cutting Head Start, college affordability, food assistance for hungry kids. I mean, when you talk about that, people are just, it's just an endless list that makes the whole thing really seem, completely non-starter, disqualifies
to
the whole
provide
thing.
a tax cut for the wealthy.
Right, exactly.
Rick?
Rick Dunham with Houston Chronicle. I wanted to ask about voter ID, since a couple of you referred to it. My native state, Pennsylvania, has a voter ID law that looks like it will be in effect. Texas, which I write about a lot, has one that the courts have held up. I was wondering what you think the effect will be, both in potentially lowering turnout or conversely increasing minority turnout or Democratic base turnout because of the Republican efforts.
I think that the latter. I think that this has the ability to really piss a lot of people off. I mean, when you, again, mess with people's access to anything, why do you, whether it's access to contraception or whether it's access to the voting booth, it makes people mad. And I actually think that it's going to backfire. And I think one of the storylines, again, the day after the election is, I think early on in the day, there's going to be a lot of stories out there. If you remember in 2008, it was about the lines. Are they going to accommodate all these people who came out to vote? And I think one of the storylines is going to be when people are being turned away, and it's going to be early in the day, and it's going to be an amazing get out the vote effort for us, because there's going to be stories early on about people being denied to vote, or they'll provisional vote, and people, the press rightfully will report on it early enough to actually make sure that to motivate more people to come out.
I think the biggest challenge for us, and I think, first of all, it's triggering unprecedented organizing on our side, not just at the campaign level, but at the organizational level too. And I think you're going to see a lot of groups make sure their voters know the steps in voting. And then, as you know, the Obama campaign has launched a very, very effective campaign, We've Got Your Back, and a campaign that was actually originally done by the NAACP. And I think you're going to see voters, and you're going to see messaging, for example, to African American voters. We have people who died for this right. We are not going to be denied. And the idea being that there will be people placed at important sites who have your back. If they want to deny you to vote, demand the provisional ballot, and basically we'll sue the hell out of them. And I think that's going to be very effective.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to depress turnout. I wonder. I mean, I hope that we can package that with issues of undisclosed, unlimited campaign contributions together as a sense that our processes really run away from the average person. I think that is compelling to a lot of people. I don't know if it's compelling to everybody. I think it's compelling to to some folks who are more engaged, or to folks who already feel sort of angry and feeling that government is politics is just run amok. I'm not sure that that's sort of a swing voter, undecided message, but I do think that that's a message that it can really kind of further remind people what's at stake and why voting's important.
Any more questions out here? Sir?
Martin Klings of the German weekly Die Zeit. I have a short question. The Republicans at their convention used the Obama phrase, "You didn't build that." And you now see a lot of testimonies coming out of people who said, "We built it." Is that going to hurt the Obama message in his campaign?
I think it was taken out of context. I was honestly sorry to see Obama even respond to it. I think people understood. If you heard the whole speech, you totally understood what he meant. And I think that the Republicans are very, very nimble, and the social media has made, as you all know, this a very nimble environment, and so they grasped onto that. But I think that people knew what they meant. We're not going to get a growing economy unless we're all in this together. We all run small businesses. Trust me, we know who's there at midnight. We're there by ourselves at midnight, maybe with a couple of key staffers. But we also know that if we don't have good schools, we don't have the people in our firms that we need who have the skills that they need. If we don't have the internet, we don't have anything to send our data out on. If we don't have decent infrastructure, we can't call people. So I think that people knew what the president meant. And it is a partnership. It is a community. And if you go back to those undecided voters who are more female, they know it takes everyone in the community doing it together. They like the partnership and community aspect of what the president's talking about.
Yeah, I mean, we asked moms, what could the government do to make your life better? And they said, pay my electric bill. But buy me milk. I mean, those were pretty progressive things that they said. They didn't say, deregulate corporations, right? They said, pay my electric bill. And I think it was interesting that, some of the speakers, one of the speakers I think had led a seminar on how to get more government funding or something. One of the I Didn't Build It speakers in Tampa or something like that. So, I mean, lots of people you can build your company and still get some support from the government. You can run your, run your household and want support from the government. So I think a lot of people see that. And I don't think any one gaffe is ultimately, or something that can be misconstrued as a gaffe, will ultimately change the election, despite all the coverage that they get.
Just to push back on that a little bit, I mean, even if I agree that comment was taken out of context. But if you look at what the president was saying in that speech, I mean, he was delivering a robust defense of government. And is that a message? Because that is really the big debate in this campaign. How much government do we need? Is he on the winning side of that argument?
Well, in all the questions that asked, do you think that there's a role for government or not? Do you think people would be better off on their own? It's like 2-to-1 role for government. And it is one of the biggest gender gaps out there. Traditionally, men have said no, women have said yes. What's interesting is right now, things are so bad that men are split, and women by almost 2-to-1 say, yes, there is a role for government. Doesn't mean government should be in my bedroom, and doesn't mean that government is running my small business, but this is a partnership. It's going to take the best that everybody's got to get this country going again.
Yeah, and I think that the national narrative is going to be interesting. Now, it won't be big government, small government, but it'll be about, Pell Grants and student loans. Guess what? That's government. It'll be about Medicare and the people's vision. Each candidate. I mean, that is.
But do people know that? I mean, because you've heard
hell yes, they
people
know
say, "Get the government out of my Medicare."
No, listen. Again, is there a tension between people in terms of this small government mantra and and what they may perceive that they get or they really get? Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But
I mean, the Republican messaging on this, I think you have to concede they've done a good job.
But they expose themselves because they expose themselves in things like the Ryan budget, which Margie was talking about. People like to talk about the Medicare side of it, but what is it? 20% cut in higher education. The last middle class entitlement is trying to get your kid to college. And that means Pell Grants, and that means low interest student loans. So, things like Medicaid, which people don't think about, that 70% of nursing home residents are on Medicaid. This will be played out. We are on the right side of this, and they've exposed themselves on this mantra, right down to what Joel was talking about. People want a balanced approach to the deficit. They will take 3-to-1 cuts to making the upper incomes pay a little bit more. We win on that.
There are no Democrats talking about how we should expand government so there's huge government bureaucracies handling everything, right? Government take over healthcare. That's not actually a Democratic message. There is a Republican message that's pretty part of what's going on the right, to just cut everything, to just get rid of everything. So I think they've pushed themselves really too far on this, because people do want government assistance for themselves. Maybe they don't want it for somebody else, but they do want it for themselves.
And there's a whole regulatory agenda too here. They throw around the regulation rule, and this is particularly true for women voters. Again, you want to be on your own with your insurance company? You try to sit on the phone with your insurance company for 6 hours and never talk to a live person? No, I'd like some regulations about what they can and cannot do to me in between. You want to be on your own with your bank? We can't get loans for our bank. Small businesses like us can't get loans anymore. Your houses are going under. So, do you want to be on your own to try to figure out if your kid's water is going to be clean? No. People want some protections. They want safety guidelines. They want regulations, because you can't do it on your own.
Let's get some more questions here, sir.
Ben Potter from the Australian Financial Review again. Quite a few months ago, there was I think a prototype ad put out by the Obama campaign, featured a cartoon woman called Julia and her progress through life, and the theme was what would be taken off her by a Romney administration. And it was very quickly pulled off the stage, I think, because Republicans lampooned it as a cradle-to-grave in the lap of government kind of program that Obama was pushing. But in the last 10 minutes, it seems that we have talked a lot about what the government can do, and I'm just wondering, in your minds, how does Obama, it's obviously causing some problem, how does Obama deal with this idea that most of his solutions tend to be, not so much out of the box, fairly traditional government programs, and there's a lack of new ideas seen over the course of the last 3.5 years in how you would actually, in an environment where fiscal rope is pretty short, how you would actually get an economy going in a situation where there's a lot of problems built up.
Can you kind of narrow down that question a little bit?
Well, yeah, I want to know what does Obama offer? What will he sell on Thursday night? Businesses that aren't necessarily seeing Small Business Administration loans or some other form of government assistance. They say, you look at NFIB, surveys, they say there's just too much of this and too much of
So
that.
are you asking what President Obama in his speech needs to say to the business community?
Well, listen, I
Yeah.
think that I don't know what he's going to say, but there's been something like 16 cuts in small business taxes. I mean, there's been a cut in payroll taxes. You know, there has been, healthcare. I mean, listen, I think that, again, this is the tale of two, the Republicans will tell you one thing and will tell the truth in terms of what he has done with small businesses. So, small businesses have been the focus, just like the middle class, of this administration.
Yeah, I mean, I just saw a poll right before we came on showing that Obama had an advantage over Romney on who's going to help small businesses.
I wanted to pick up a question that Ron asked Joel Benenson earlier and pose it to our panelists, which is, does the president, in his acceptance speech, does he need to talk about race somehow, overtly, indirectly? And part of the motivation perhaps would be he needs to mobilize these folks that came out for him in 2008, who have stood by him and tried to be patient. Does he need to give them a reason to come to the polls in 2012 if there is going to be those enthusiasm gap? How overt should he be in talking about race, and what are the risks there?
I don't think you should talk about race because nobody's going to miss that he's the first African-American president when he's delivering his speech. I mean, it would be like, does Hillary Clinton need to talk about gender if she were president of the United States?
She sure would.
Maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't. For re-election, I bet she wouldn't, actually. I bet she'd talk about her record for all Americans. I think that Barack Obama will talk about his record for all Americans. By the way, the enthusiasm gap is not particularly apparent among African-American voters. It's not African-American voters who are at risk here. They will be out in full force. The enthusiasm gap is more, to the extent that it still exists, is more among young people and unmarried voters, honestly. So I think that I think his race is obvious. His leadership as the first African-American president is obvious. I think he's going to talk about an agenda that gets this entire country moving again and make sure that every kid in this country has a great opportunity and every family can get into the middle class. And that's going to be a stark contrast to both Clint Eastwood and Mitt Romney.
I mean, President Obama certainly doesn't need speechwriting tips from me, but I do think, I think ultimately his message is we're all in this together, and he can do that. One way to do that is to not say, well, they're doing this and this group does this and that group does that. I think part of his message is we're all in this together. Everybody is working together, and that's always been his message.
We have time for one more question.
Chuck Hers, state chair in Wyoming, where the electorate is largely white, multi-generation American, blue collar, green collar, religious. We haven't done that well with that electorate, that part of the electorate, for a long time. They're a big part of the electorate nationwide, let alone in Wyoming. We should be getting them by rights because we share we're concerned about their interests and working for them. We also share a lot of their basic values, but we don't seem to be doing terribly well with them. How can we do better?
Well, that's not just this presidential race, it's Democrats in general, but I think that the one thing that you find in national polling and maybe some of our polling for rural voters, I think that Democrats have a great way to talk with them. One is rural voters are disproportionately seniors, and again, I think this Medicare issue is going to be a really big issue to talk to rural voters. And then rural voters are heavily disproportionately veterans. And that's one thing we haven't talked about today. And our record, or Obama's record and the Democrats' record on veterans, is tremendous. And again, goes back to the cuts and the votes that Republicans have taken on vets issues. As Joel said, we did really well, or Obama did really well, better since Carter, who himself was a rural voter or rural candidate. And I think we're going to, we will be fighting for that vote to the very end here.
Coming from Montana, I appreciate my fellow Westerners. So this is something I've thought a lot about. And I think, there are four things. And I don't think we get the message out enough. And we don't pay enough attention, honestly, to our potential in states like your home state and my home state. And When we were talking about the 16 battleground states, okay, you want to write off a state like my home state. Right next to yours, we have a Democratic governor. We have 2 Democratic senators. There are a lot of so-called other target states that aren't in that good a shape. Medicare, I grew up on a ranch. No one in my family ever had health insurance. I remember sitting at kitchen tables where people said, well, at least thank God Joe's 65 now because he can get Medicare. Support for education. States like yours and mine. I mean, a kid from a ranch in Montana went to Ivy League schools because we had good schools in Montana. I went to public schools. No private schools in my hometown. No private schools in my home state except parochial schools. I don't know where we were intending to go. Roads. You got to those schools. I live 25 miles from school. So we have an agenda, I think, for rural America. We don't get it out enough. And we need to use our Western voices, which are so strong, and target those states more. So I really agree with you.
Well, before we get Elizabeth up here to wrap things up, I want to thank the panel very much for a great conversation and you for your questions.
Yes, thanks so very much to Ron and Beth and to Celinda, Margie, and John for this interesting discussion.
And the National Journal will be presenting a forum every morning from Charlotte, and we will be covering it live. Uptown Charlotte, also known as downtown in most other cities, is on your screen, the home of the 2012 Democratic National Convention and the mayor of that city in North Carolina.